Today we're going to talk about measurement. When we think of measuring something, we oftentimes think of how long something is. And so that would be considered the length of something. Sometimes it refers to the width of something as well. And some of the terms that we use and are familiar with are things like inches, yards, feet, miles. Those are considered standard units of measurement that we use here in the United States. Around the world, other places will use something called the metric system. And because of time, we're not going to have a whole lot of time to get into the metric system, but we're going to discuss standard measurements today relating to length, relating to weight, and relating to something called capacity. So we're going to discuss those three things and how to convert or change one unit of measurement, such as inches, into something called feet and so forth, okay? So first of all, let's talk about the different types of measurement. We just mentioned that we have length. We can also measure things by how much they weigh and also by how much a container can hold, which would be capacity. All right, so length, what do you think of when you think of the length of something? I already mentioned some examples, but what are some of the labels that you would think of? Things like inches, feet, and so forth, right? When you have a ruler or a yardstick or a measuring tape, that's what you're doing. When you think of weight, what do you think of with weight? Right, we think of ounces, we think of pounds, we think of tons. And then with capacity, some of you are probably more familiar with capacity than you realize you are, but capacity is talking about the amount that a container can hold, such as a gallon or a quart or a cup. And so that's what we are referring to when we think about capacity. All right, the word convert means to change. So sometimes you may have to measure something and it might make sense to measure it in inches, but other times it might make more sense to measure something in feet or miles. If you were to measure a mile, you certainly wouldn't want to talk about how many inches. You wouldn't measure it by inches. So there are different appropriate units of measurement to use for whatever it is that you're measuring. So what we're going to do today is talk a little bit about how to change one to another, what to do if we know how many inches is in something. How do we, figure out how many feet that would be and so forth. The biggest thing that I want you to understand is we have to know how to multiply, we have to know how to divide, and we have to know when to do them. And if you can think of understanding what the actual unit of measurement is in comparison to the other unit of measurement, that's going to help you a lot. Here's what I mean. If we have something that is, say, 12 inches, and by the way, when you see those little two, they almost looks like quotation marks, that represents inches. When you see one by itself like that represents feet. This would be 12 inches, this would be 7 feet. All right, so let's talk a little bit about 12 inches. We know that that's the standard size of a ruler. We know that that equals 1 foot. So when you have something that would be inches and you are trying to put it into how many feet that would be, you have a lot of something because the inches are smaller. So what you're trying to do, if we have lots of inches here, okay, let's pretend we got 12 inches there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And we want to see how many of those would equal a foot. What we're doing is we're trying to group as many inches as there are in a foot, which would be 12, into a group called a foot. So we would take all of these and call them 1 foot, FT. So I had inches, and they're small, so I'm trying to group them together and put them into something larger called a foot. I'm going to divide. So what I would do is I would take the amount of inches that I have, 12, and divide by the number of inches in a foot. So 12 goes into 12 one time. 1 would be how many feet 12 inches is equal to. Let's do another one. If I have something like 72 inches, I have a table that measures 72 inches long. Well, how many feet is that? Well, if I take the 72, that's what I'm trying to divide up, all these inches. If I take the 72 inches and divide them by the number of inches in 1 foot, that's going to tell me how many feet that's equal to. So how many times does 12 go into 72? It goes in 6 times. because 6 times 12 is 72. And I don't have any inches left over. So therefore 72 inches equals 6 feet. They are equivalent amounts. This tells me how many inches I have. This tells me how many feet I have. It's the same amount. So I'm taking all of them, all of my inches, all 72 of them, and I'm grouping them into feet. So if I have let's just pretend I have 72 of these little guys up here. These are my inches. I'm not going to do all 72, but let's just pretend I have 72. I'm taking a group of 12. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'm going to call that 1 foot. And I'm seeing how many of those circles I can get out of all 72 of these. So let's do another 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. There's another grouping or another foot. So what I'm doing to all of my 72 inches is I'm dividing them up with 12 in each group. So here's my problem then. I'm taking all 72 inches and dividing them up so that I have 12 in each group. So I'm dividing by 12. If I were to continue to do this method and show this model, I would end up having 6 groups, which is what the 6 feet represents. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense to you. Let's say I have 60. No, let's not do 60. Let's do 5. Let's say I have 5 feet. Okay, so that will be having 5 rulers lined up. How many inches is that? Well, because I know that there are 12 in my 5 feet, if this equals 5 feet right here, it doesn't, but if it would, and this equals 5 feet, I would say, okay, well, in this, let's pretend that that's a foot. From here to here is a foot, from here to here is a foot, from here to here, and so forth. Just pretend that it actually is. I'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feet. Inside of that foot, I have how many inches? Well, how many inches are in a ruler? 12, right? So I have 12 inches here, and I have 12 inches here, and I have 12 inches here, 12 inches here, and 12 inches here. Well, if I have a total of 5 feet, how many inches is that? What would I have to do to figure that out? Right, I would have to do 12 times 5 because it's 12 inches in 1 foot, but I have 5 of them, so I want to multiply 12 times the 5. And when I do that, I would get 60 inches. Okay, so you see how we're doing that? That line of thinking is going to be the same all throughout all of these different units of length, weight, and capacity. And what you have to understand is look at the label. What I mean by that is look to see whether you're starting with inches and going to feet, or whether you're starting with feet and going to inches. You want to look at the label. You do not want to look at the numbers, but look at the label. If your label is saying you have feet and you want to see how many inches you have, that means you're going from a larger unit, feet, to a smaller unit of inches. And because you're going large to small, remember, we're looking at the label, large to small, feet to inches. Maybe it's miles to yards. So when you're going large unit to small unit, you're always going to multiply. It might help you to think to yourself, since you're going large to small, you're going to have a lot of them. So in order for you to have a lot of them, you're going to need to multiply. Here we did our example of 5 feet. How many inches are in them? There will be 12, so we're multiplying 12 times 5. All right? Now, when you're going from a small unit, like an inch, to a larger unit, that's when you're going to divide. In our first example, remember, we had all of those inches, 72 of them, and we wanted to see how many feet there were. So we were going from inch to feet, small inch to large feet. So when you go small to large, you're going to divide. And that's the important thing to remember. Large to small, you multiply. Small to large, you divide. Okay, now, how do you know what to divide by? How do you know what to multiply by? That's going to be something that you're going to have to memorize, and you're going to have to understand how many units make up the other unit. For instance, 12 inches makes up 1 foot. How many feet are in a yard? Right, there are 3. If you take a yardstick, you're going to have 3 feet inside of that yardstick. How many inches are going to be in a yard? Some of you know, right off the bat, there are 36. But if you're not sure, you can figure it out because you can say, well, if this is my yard and I know there are 3 feet in here, that means this is a foot, this is a foot, and then inside that foot, we know that a foot is the same thing as 12 inches. So I could take 12 inches times my 3 feet to tell me that in all of this, there would be 36 inches. I could also say 1 yard, or I could say 3 feet. That's all equivalent. Okay? So what I want you to know and be familiar with as you move into middle school is 12 inches equals a foot, 3 feet equals a yard, and 5,280 feet equals 1 mile. All right, so those units are in your math book, so you can always look to see what the table tells you. If you look on page 807 in your math book, you'll have how many inches are in a foot and how many feet are in a yard and how many feet are in a mile. And so you can go from there. You're going to have to know and be familiar with how to change things from one to another. All right, let's do something like this. If I have something like 42 inches, because not everything comes out evenly, right? If I have 42 inches and I want to figure out how many feet that is, I would take my 42 inches and divide it by 12 because there are 12 inches in 1 foot. So for every 12 inches that I pull away, that's going to equal 1 foot. Remember that division is just repeated subtraction. So I'm literally taking my 42 and grouping them into 12s and putting 12 in a group. So I'm going to say that 12 goes into 42 3 times. 3 times 12 is 36. When I subtract this, I get 6. I compare and I'm good. Nothing else to bring down. So we've learned a couple of things that we can do here at this point. We've learned how to continue to divide by making our decimal here, 3.5. We've also learned that we can do things as a remainder. This would mean that there are 3 whole feet, but we have extra left over. Well, what is it that we're dividing? We're dividing inches, so we would have 6 inches left over. That's what that's telling you. The other thing that we just learned how to do is to say, here's my remainder. I make it a mixed number. This tells me that there are 3 wholes, and a fraction would be 6/12 or half, because when we reduce that, we would get half. So we'd have 3 full feet and 1/2 of another one. Okay, do you see how that works? Okay, so 3.5 feet is what we would have. 3.5, if you do it this way, I'm going to show this to you too. If we were doing it as a decimal, we have 3.5. How would you say that? 3 and 5/10. Well, 5/10 is the same thing as a half, right? 5/10. They're all equivalent. So you can see how decimals and fractions work together. So it doesn't really matter how you decide to write your answer if the directions don't tell you. The bottom line is you're going to have 3.5 feet. So 42 inches is the same thing as 3.5 feet. 3 full feet and then 1/2 of a foot. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead then and talk a little bit about weight. What are some of the measurements that you might need to be responsible when you're dealing with weight? Well, we are most familiar with, and we usually use pounds. The abbreviation for a pound is LB. I don't know where it comes from, but that's what it is, LB. Then we have something called an ounce, which we worked a little bit with this when we did our snowman project, when we did our decimal project, when we had to build our own snowman and you had to tell how many pounds, what the weight was, and you had certain stipulations that you had to make sure you kept in mind. And so when we were doing our measurement here, we know that OZ is the same as the abbreviation for an ounce. So just know that. How many ounces are in a pound? Do you remember what we said? There are 16. So 1 pound equals 16 ounces. Okay. And then we have something called a ton. And that's the abbreviation is a capital T like that. that would be a ton. And that is 2,000 pounds. So if we have a ton of something, it means we have 2,000 pounds of something. So does it make sense to measure if you have a big dump truck full of dirt? Mr. and Mrs. Greenlee have a big dump truck full of dirt coming to our house tomorrow. Would we measure that in pounds? Probably not, because that would be a lot of pounds. But we can group a lot of those pounds together into 2,000 and call it a ton. So we might say, I need 2 tons of dirt, rather than, saying I need 4,000 pounds of dirt. Okay, equivalent amounts, but we just, depending on what you're measuring, there's a more appropriate label to give it. The same thing is true here. If you have 48 ounces, and you want to figure out how many pounds that is, you're going to divide your 48 ounces by the number of ounces in a pound. Well, how many ounces did we say are in a pound? 16, good. So we would say 16 goes into 48 how many times? Well, you probably have to go off to the side to figure that out. It goes in 3 times. So that would be the same thing. 48 ounces is the same thing as 3 pounds. Probably the most familiar time that you're going to hear at this point in your life of ounces is when you hear that a baby has been born. We oftentimes hear a baby being born and we say things like, well, how much did it weigh? And you might say, well, the baby was 7 pounds 2 ounces. Okay? So this just means a little bit over 7 pounds. It's 7 full pounds and then 2 ounces towards the next pound. You would have to have another whole 16 ounces in order for you to bump this up to 8 pounds. We need 14 more ounces to the weight, because then we'd have another whole pound here, 14 plus 2. All right, you see that? Okay, the last one that I want to talk to you about is capacity. And capacity sometimes is one that gets us a little bit confusing. It can be confusing because we know what gallons are, but sometimes we get mixed up. So I want you to know that in your packet, you're going to have something that looks like this. This is called our gallon botman. And this is a really great visual for you to be able to see how many quarts and pints and cups and so forth are inside of a gallon. You can see here that the gallon is the central body of gallon botman. And off of each of the side of him would be like his shoulders. Okay, so there are 2 quarts in 1 gallon. Then, just like in your arm, this is your upper arm or your shoulder. Then you have your lower arm, which we know is your ulna and your radius. It's got 2 parts to it, just like this has 2 pints coming off of the quart. So that means that we've got 1 gallon here. We've got a shoulder, and then we also have, I only talked about the upper body, but we have the lower body too. We've got the 2 thighs. And so each of those larger parts here, the 2 quarts up here and the 2 quarts down below, that equals how many quarts would come from a gallon. So here's our body of the gallon. We've got 1 quart, another quart, another quart, and another quart. These represent your shoulders. These represent your thighs. So how many quarts total are inside of a gallon? 4. Okay, so 4 quarts in a gallon. You can also say that inside of a quart, here's 1 quart here. You can see how this is 1 whole gallon, and each of these quarts is coming from the same gallon. So that's why there are 4 of them connected to the gallon. Then you can see here, this is just 1 quart right here. And inside of the quart, you've got 2 pints, just like your 2 lower arms come out from your upper arm. You've got 2 pints that come from the quart. So we've got 4 quarts in a gallon, 2 pints in a quart, and it shows that on each one of the quarts. And then from the pint, you will notice that there are 2 cups inside of each pint. You've got these 2 cups here with this pint, and these 2 cups over here with this pint. And that happens on every single limb of gallon botman. Another one that I really like to use as well when we talk about this is I like to use a big G. And I'm going to try and fit that on here so that it fits on the camera. And this G is going to represent a gallon. There we go. And inside of the gallon, we've got 4 quarts. And then inside of the quart, we have our 2 pints. And I literally have students who sometimes draw this on their paper when they're taking a test. So that's fine for you to do that if that is helpful for you. And then what's going to go inside of each one of those P's? 2 little C's for the cups. And this is a great visual as well. So they're gallon bot man and this G are not related. You don't have to do both drawings. It's, usually one or the other, whichever one makes more sense to you. I like this one because I can see the Q, and right away I can see, there are 2 P's inside of that Q. That means there are 2 pints inside of a quart, and inside of a pint there are 2 C's, or 2 cups. So you've got 2 cups inside of this pint, 2 cups inside of this pint. How many cups would be inside of a quart? Well, you can see that there would be 1, 2, 3, 4 cups inside of a quart. There will be 2 pints inside of a quart. All right, so I'm going to send this home with you so that you have it for a reference as you're doing work. But this is another thing that you can have. I don't have any handouts of that. That's why I wanted to show it to you here. Hopefully that will help you. If you take a look at your book on pages 809 and 827 and 841, that's where you can have some independent practice. And I am guessing that you can do this. It's not always going to come out evenly, and that's okay. But the biggest thing for all 3 of those, whether it's length, whether it's weight, or whether it's capacity, is when you are going from large to small, and I don't mean numbers, I mean units. Large like feet to something smaller like inches. Large like gallons to something smaller like quarts. Large like pounds to something smaller like ounces. Those kinds of things. Large to small, you're going to multiply. Multiply. I know that's going off the screen, but I think you can see part of it. When you're going small to large, you're going to divide. All right, small to large, you're going to divide. Large to small, you're going to multiply because you're going to need a lot of them and you're needing a larger number. Hopefully that is helpful to you. I bet you mom and dad can help you with knowing whether your answers are correct. And if not, you can certainly get a hold of me and I'll be happy to go over them with you. All right, have a good one.